Hello, listeners. My name is Michael Chisano. I own a small business and have a wife and 2 children. I live in a suburban community in Massachusetts. Several years ago, however, I stumbled onto something strange going on at my daughter's public high school. Our family was sitting around the dinner table. Quite without guile or any particular intention, my daughter, then aged 13, and in her first year of high school, told my wife and I about mandatory assemblies she had attended without getting my permission as part of Homophobia Week activities. In these assemblies, gay men described their political goals and their agendas, and how they wished to have the right to marry and adopt children. My daughter mentioned that perhaps I was homophobic if I did not agree with these goals. Later, we discovered that a Catholic priest, brought in on the last day as a pretense to balance, was almost booed off the stage, so effective had been the pro-gay speakers. The next few months became a crash course in homosexual political activism. This was a world that I did not think existed. To me, homosexuality was a behavior pattern on the fringes of society, not something to be introduced to teenagers at the beginning of their sexual maturity. I discovered a vast network of homosexual activist groups, ranging from elite Washington-based lobbyists who have the personal ear of the president, to such bizarre groups as digital queers, homosexual computer programmers who donate their time and expertise to homosexual activism. Perhaps most troubling of all was GLSEN, Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, started as a group of gay teachers, but now a nationwide network of activists dedicated to advancing homosexual ideology within public schools, and largely succeeding, I might add. As you listen to the speakers who follow, keep in mind that they are talking about groups which are targeting children, your children. Despite their public pronouncements to the contrary, the goal of homosexual activists is not tolerance for themselves, or even tolerance of children who declare themselves gay or lesbian, whatever that can mean in the case of unfocused teen sexuality. No, the true goal is saturation and conversion, leading to redefined sexual norms toward a world of gay celebration and affirmation. And because adults are not likely to change their views, these gay activists know that their best chance of succeeding is to change the hearts and minds of children, largely by undermining the values taught by parents. Subversion, not tolerance, is their goal. Our first speaker is Brian Kamenker, a father of 2 who has himself seen the power of homosexual activism in public schools. Brian's story is hair-raising. Some of the things he has exposed defy belief. As a word of caution, you may not want small children to hear this section of the tape.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I think this is really very important. We've been seeing things happen in the last 15, 20 years that I don't think has ever been seen before at any time in history. In particular, in the public schools, what we've called the homosexual agenda has become particularly distressful to parents. I know myself, I have a 6th grade little girl in the middle school in Newton, and I had to pull her out of health class because part of the health class's goals was to help their children understand and appreciate their sexual orientation. I felt that maybe for a 6th grader, this is a little too much. And I got an argument from the principal. He said he believed in it, and that if I had a religious reason, maybe he'd consider letting me pull my little girl out. I said I didn't think I needed a religious reason, and she's showing up at your office tomorrow instead of going to class, and that was that. But it's far beyond that. If we look at just a small percentage of the kinds of things that we've seen throughout Massachusetts over the last few years, taking a Jeff Jacoby article from March 7th, 1995, that talks about an Ashland middle school. Children were assigned gay roles for a play on discrimination. 2 boys had to pretend they were a homosexual couple seeking to adopt a child. One boy's line was, "It's natural to be attracted to the same sex." 2 girls in the class were told to hold hands and act out the roles of lesbian partners. Parents learned of this only when their children mentioned it afterwards. Silver Lake High School in Kingston, Massachusetts, the 9th grade textbook taught that sexuality is a matter of trial and error and personal choice, and among its lessons, testing your ability to function sexually and give pleasure to another person may be less threatening in the early teens with people of your own sex. You may come to the conclusion that growing up means rejecting the values of your parents. Homophobia Week at Beverly High School featured guest lecturers from gay and lesbian speakers bureaus, and students heard presentations on homosexual marriage and the rights of gays and lesbians to raise children. And it goes on and on. One of the things that has happened a lot are surveys. For instance, in Framingham, is it possible heterosexuality is a phase you will grow out of? Are you heterosexual because you fear the same sex? If you've never slept with anyone of the same sex, how do you know you wouldn't prefer it? Is it possible you need a good gay experience? This was given to teenagers at the high school in Framingham, Massachusetts, and the principal said, and I quote, that these were not advocacy, just thoughtful and constructive lessons in tolerance. As part of the same sensitivity curriculum, oral and anal sex is, quote, methods of birth control that preserve the concept of virginity. In Amherst, Massachusetts, for young children, they had an exhibit that featured photographs of homosexual households, part of the current efforts to reshape what people think about marriage and family. And a school committee member agreed that parents should not be able to keep their children from seeing this. They said that it would be a direct insult to lesbian and gays should this be. So much of this has been under the rubric, as the next speaker will talk about, of safe schools. But it always seems to be something more than that. In Brookline High School, Gay and Lesbian Awareness Month, students were invited to, quote, tell someone about their homosexual fantasies or experiences and to wear pink cardboard triangles imprinted with the word ally. These were supposedly to help children who were confused. These are children, by the way, who are confused often. They're at their most confusing time of their lives. I have in front of me here the homeroom questionnaire presented at Dedham High School. Do you know anyone who is gay, lesbian, or bisexual? Should they be allowed to serve in our military? Should they be allowed to marry? And on and on and on. Do you feel comfortable with them? And again, another survey that was handed out in a Massachusetts high school. When and how did you decide you were heterosexual? Is it possible heterosexuality is a phase that you will grow out of? Imagine children being given this over and over again. Last year, throughout Massachusetts schools, a photo exhibit called The Shared Heart, the Governor's Commission on Gay and Lesbian Youth, it was, and I saw this, an exhibit of so-called homosexual teenagers to reinforce the idea among children that homosexuality is another natural part of life. This exhibit was sponsored by the state of Massachusetts and went through high schools throughout Massachusetts. It was exhibited in a big way in the State House, and it was done with quite a bit of fanfare. What's behind a lot of this? Over and over again, we see this group called GLSEN, the Gay and Lesbian and Straight Education Network, which is a national organization which has been very, very active in the public school system and has been the recipient of a lot of state funding. Some of the programs that have gone through dozens and dozens of public schools through this organization are Gay Straight Alliance clubs where students are encouraged to celebrate their homosexuality, confidential homosexual counseling, surveys, speakers, gay history, where famous figures from history are described as actually having been homosexual, gay library sections, proclamations by politicians. The gay clubs in particular, I have found to be very, very distressing. These gay straight alliances that have been going through the public schools. One of the things, again, that our next speaker will get into in more detail is that these are groups that meet after school. They're run often by people who are not involved with the school system. essentially young gay adults. The meetings are encouraged to be confidential. They're very well funded, and they often sort of go after or try to bring in children who are sort of on the edge, who are confused, maybe going through a confused time in life, and bring in and give them an identity. Now, who runs all of this stuff? Governor Weld established the Governor's Commission on Gay and Lesbian Youth several years ago. And through its activist administrator, David LaFontaine, it has blossomed into dozens and dozens of schools. He first came into prominence as part of a group of gay demonstrators who screamed profanities and threw condoms at priests during a Catholic ordination ceremony. He was also arrested at the State House for disrupting a press conference on the subject of homosexuality. And in fact, during a televised debate where I personally debated him, he told me that these confidential homosexuality counseling courses, in other words, where they take a child that they feel is confused about his sexuality without his knowledge and consent, bring him to a homosexual counselor to help him talk through this. On tape, he told me that he defends these because parents' values need to be improved upon. And in fact, the city of Holyoke, Massachusetts, I am told, threw all of their gay programs out upon having their school board see this tape. But he, in many people's opinion, is a religious bigot. He has said things that are, let me just say, are very uncomplimentary to religion and religious people. And this is the person who continues to run these programs. What is the Governor's Commission on Gay and Lesbian Youth? It is, as I said, extremely well funded, and I'll get into that. And they put out a book on essentially talking about making the schools safe. The whole cover of everything is making safe schools. Safe for what? Safe for things like children whose dress does not conform to gender expectations. This, in their opinion, should be a crime if that bothers people. Developing numerous types of courses, developing methods of coming into various schools, how to confront a school committee, how to confront parents, how to bring the message to school children in Massachusetts. And if you look at their recommendations, it's pretty frightening stuff. This is a public commission that recommends conducting confidential surveys with students, outreach into the schools, and numerous things, essentially more of what I already talked about. And then, of course, there's their annual event, the Gay Straight Youth Pride March, which starts at the State House, is usually attended by several hundred of these Gay Straight Alliance clubs from around Massachusetts. And last year I attended. They had some very, I would consider, inflammatory speeches. They marched down to the Esplanade, and they finished the evening with a gay prom that Mayor Menino of Boston gave over the entire first floor of Boston City Hall to a gay prom, where these children, often hand in hand, were led into this room, these several rooms. Adults weren't let in, and there was music and what have you. One of the more bizarre parts of this, their head of security, we talked to him for a bit. He was a guy with open sores on his face and a dog collar. I kid you not. And he talked about his growing up, having been raped as a young child and now as an active homosexual. And when you talk about the numerous high schools and numerous groups that have become involved with this movement, it's really quite frightening. And the kinds of money that is going into this. Here, Governor's Youth Commission proposes addressing anti-gay feelings beginning in grade school. It's becoming a momentum that is almost unstoppable. And it has reached, of course, the State House. There are now more and more laws. I was reading in the paper this week where Governor Cellucci has now appointed a person to be the first student civil rights director. This is a gay man who is the student civil rights director for the governor's task force on hate crimes in high schools and middle schools. Now, how do you suppose they are going to define hate crimes? Well, when you didn't think that this thing could become more frightening, it has. I remember reading the August 28, 1997 Boston Herald. Bay State budgets $1 million for gay youth support. Governor Paul Cellucci has quadrupled, according to this article, Bill Weld's appropriation to these programs. They now have $1 million to spend. And I can tell you from what we've seen since August, that $1 million is going a long way. Everything has become more and more aggressive. It's become more encompassing. Governor Cellucci is no stranger to the gay movement in Massachusetts. He has his picture in Bay Windows and other gay papers a lot on how he feels that gay youth ought to be coming out. Here is a picture with David LaFontaine, who I discussed earlier. Here's his picture on, I believe it's last May 18th, proclaiming May to be Gay Straight Student Pride Month in Massachusetts. Not your usual Republican governor. Where is that $1 million going? Let me just discuss one school. My local high school, Newton North High. Newton North High recently had Be Glad Day a little over a month ago. What is Be Glad Day? Entire classes were led to anti-homophobia workshops. There was a transgender panel at the school where children were encouraged to go to. Transgender is a medical situation where people believe that they're of a different sex and have their bodies mutilated and changed to reflect that. This was in a high school. Teen panels on how I came out and found my new identity. I talked to some of the students who went through this, and it was a strange experience even for them. At both main entrances to the school, kids were given pink triangle stickers, and the purpose for that was to show solidarity with the homosexual movement. And if you didn't have a pink triangle sticker, it was evident that you didn't show solidarity, and that was considered bad. Entire classes were taken to these assemblies. Pamphlets were handed out and signs. The signs all over, 1 in 10 people are homosexual, are gay. In fact, one pamphlet said more than that are gay, that they just don't know it yet. Again, a pamphlet, how do you know you're not gay? If you've never slept with someone of the same sex, you may like it. Homophobia is a disease. A little off the subject, 1 out of 7 wives is raped by her husband. There was the constant theme that the persecution of gays in America today is exactly the same as blacks before the civil rights movement. The sign outside, 10% of all gay students in this school have been spat on. And it went on and on and on. There were some more, let's see, if you've never kissed another man, you may not know what your real sexual orientation is. Why are people assumed to be heterosexual instead of gay? And gay people can't help what they are. And in fact, this week actually was reflected somewhat in some of the junior high schools. I talked to someone from a junior high school that discussed a history class where they would ask you, do you know someone who's gay? Move to the other side of the class. Have you ever thought about being gay? Move to the other side. Are you pretty sure you might be gay? And these are junior high school kids. This has become more aggressive. It's become more enveloping. And it's all again under making schools safe. The average parent has to say, what is going on here? For the pièce de résistance, we have the coverage in the school newspaper of this event. Now, this is a school newspaper in a local high school. Here's one article that starts out, in kindergarten and first grade, the heterosexist mainstream begins its recruiting process. One day, class, you will grow up and marry someone of the opposite sex, meaning to do otherwise is wrong. And it goes on to describe how, no, this is what the article says. Then we have the whole spread on Be Glad Day, on the workshop on discrimination, the coming out to your children, where they brought supposedly gay parents to describe their family relationship. Here is a gay father in a student assembly. Transgender people discuss their insights. Students to give a wake-up call about homophobic language being insulting. I heard many stories that if you say anything at all that might be construed as being insulting to homosexuality as a class of people, people were screamed at and called bigots, treated terribly for having the wrong opinion. And of course, the homophobic language seminar. Panel speaks out on finding identity. This is about children. Here's an 8th grader finding out that she's really gay and writing about this. And then we have the science teacher advisor role model, a lesbian teacher. Let me read this here. Another facet of the teacher's contribution to the school is that she is an out teacher and feels comfortable explaining to her students that she is gay. Kids are naturally curious about teachers' lives, she said. When I say in the first day of class, who has questions, they might ask me if I'm married, and I say I can't be because I'm a lesbian. And it goes on and on. Governor Weld's $1 million, as I said, has become an unbelievable, effective tool to this movement. So, without further ado, the real speaker of the evening is Brian Burt. Brian is a third-year law student at Harvard University. He is president of the Society for Law, Life, and Religion. He put on an unbelievable conference this past year on Coming Out of Homosexuality Day. He has done a tremendous amount of research. He has done his thesis on gay marriage in the United States. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian Burt.
My name is Brian Burt. I'm a third-year student at Harvard Law School. You may have gotten one of the handouts. I'm here tonight to talk to you about a subject that's become a big part of my life in the last couple of years or so. It's not a subject I readily dove into. It's not a subject that I'd prefer to be talking about, but it's something that I think is crucial to the future, that the parents know what's going on in the schools, and we know what's going on in the general homosexual movement. I come from Pittsburgh, a very conservative town, unlike many places here in Massachusetts. And while I was in Pittsburgh, I really had no idea what the concept of homosexuality even was. And since coming to Harvard 3 years ago, I was plunged, I guess, off the deep end into a culture that readily accepts homosexuality and promotes homosexuality in probably every way imaginable. You've all heard, I'm sure, through various sources, whether it's a television program or a news magazine or someone in your local community, that homosexuality is not only an acceptable lifestyle, but something that's healthy and good, something that we should promote as often as we can. And unfortunately, we only hear one side of the debate often, and especially up here in Massachusetts, as a non-native, I've seen how one-sided the conversation can be. And so our purpose here tonight is not to advance an agenda or not to advocate a particular position, but simply to give you the facts to allow you to know what's going on and what the agenda is in your school. I can speak to this issue because I've done a lot of research in it. I've never participated in a lifestyle as one of our speakers has. I haven't spent my life focused on counseling to homosexuals, but I've done something that a few people have probably done and few people probably will do, which is to do an investigation on the inside, trying to find out what's actually going on from a perspective that we don't get in the mainstream media. And I did this by going to a conference, doing research, finding out what I could learn about actually what the movement was about. We hear the concept of tolerance told to us throughout, that homosexuality and its mission is about tolerance. And I think everyone in this room can agree that tolerance is a good virtue. It's good to be accepting of as many alternative choices and behaviors as we can, provided that they don't harm society in general, they don't harm community in general, and they aren't forced upon an individual by those unwilling to accept that particular choice. That's what the concept of tolerance used to mean. Unfortunately, in today's culture, tolerance has taken on a different connotation. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about what's going on in the schools nationwide and give you some facts and some information that you may not know, and that I think is critical for you to make a decision as to what stance you'd like to take with regard to your own children and your own school district. You may or may not be surprised to know I actually talked to a number of groups just in the past couple months, and I'm still shocked to find how little people actually know of what's going on in their own communities. And again, being not from Boston, to me it's a shock to find out what's happening, and I readily pay attention to it and can find out what's going on just by a little bit of behind-the-scenes research and so forth. But it's amazing how much people don't know about what's going on. And I'd like to read from you just a brief quote to tell you that tolerance may not be all it's cracked up to be. These are words from an article called The Overhauling of Straight America. And it talks about a campaign that was put together some years ago about what the homosexual movement should do to provide for the best way to integrate itself into our culture. Two authors say, in the early stages of any campaign to reach straight America, the masses should not be shocked and repelled by premature exposure to homosexual behavior itself. Instead, the imagery of sex should be downplayed, and gay rights should be reduced to an abstract social question as much as possible. First, let the camel get his nose in the tent, and only later, his unsightly derriere. These authors are not an aberration within the movement. These authors speak for the activists who are out there trying to promote homosexuality in one of its many forms. I'm just about to complete a 100-page thesis for a law school requirement about same-sex marriage, something that until recently was just inconceivable. Yet I've discovered there are 800 law review articles out there promoting same-sex marriage from every top scholar in the country, while there's maybe 10 to 15 that actually promote the traditional concept of marriage. So it gives you somewhat of an idea of how slanted the dialogue has been, and I think this is a great opportunity to provide a variety of perspectives on what is going on and a variety of perspectives as to what information is not being presented in the mainstream media and to the parents as well. These authors went on to advocate 4 strategies, which I think you'll become pretty familiar with by now, and I think you'll recognize as I describe them. First, desensitization. To desensitize the public is to help it view homosexuality with indifference instead of keen emotion. Second, portrayal of gays as victims. In any campaign to win over the public, gays must be cast as victims in need of protection, so that straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. Third, play upon Americans' antipathy to discrimination. Our campaign should not demand direct support for homosexual practices, but should instead make anti-discrimination its theme. And fourth, and probably most tragically, vilify anti-gay activists. We saw, as the first speaker told us, about some of what's been going on here in the local community. And the authors recommend, to be blunt, they must be vilified. The public should be shown images of ranting homophobes whose secondary traits disgust middle America. These images might include the Ku Klux Klan demanding that gays be burned alive or castrated. I can speak from experience when I tell you that this strategy has been in place for some years, and at Harvard it's, as the first speaker mentioned, almost a religion. I hosted back last October something called National Coming Out of Homosexuality Day. This event was simply designed to counter Coming Out of Homosexuality Day, and in doing so provide a message that one can leave the lifestyle. One of our speakers is going to talk about that toward the end of the program. But essentially what the theme was, that we hear that homosexuality is genetic, it's an immutable characteristic, it's not a choice, there's no question, but once you feel these tendencies to participate in the lifestyle, and that once you have such urges, you should give yourself over to the lifestyle. That's the rhetoric we hear today. Well, we each have limited time here, so I'm not going to go into all the specifics. Some of our later speakers are. But homosexuality, as they will tell you, is not the most healthy behavior. And my goal in presenting to you today is to tell you that what's happening in the schools is promotion of this behavior. And like I said, I'll leave it up to the rest of the speakers to tell you a little bit about why it's unhealthy and why it may be destructive to the individual and to the community. What I want to focus on in my remaining minutes is my experience with a group called GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. It's a group that was founded right near here in Boston. The founder of the group was a man by the name of Kevin Jennings, and his goal was pretty simple. The goal was to infiltrate the schools nationwide and provide for the schools to adopt programs that would advocate and promote homosexuality at all levels, starting in kindergarten. The goal was to infiltrate the schools nationwide and provide for the schools to adopt programs that would advocate and promote homosexuality at all levels, starting in kindergarten. It's a group you may not even have heard of. Unfortunately, GLSEN has become a national organization, has met with success. Kevin Jennings has sat at the right hand of the president and had his attention. That gives you some estimation of what influence the group has. And it has chapters around the country and is continuing to promote the agenda of promoting homosexuality in the schools. But in the mainstream public, you wouldn't have heard that. You would have only heard that the group is about, again, tolerance. That the group is promoting an agenda of what they call safe schools. Well, I had the opportunity to go down to a conference in New York. I wrote an article which details the conference. It's in a Lambda report, which are available outside on the table. In short, I just want to quote you some things that were said at this conference, because none of you know me. I'm not actually from the local community here, and so you have no reason to embrace my opinion over any others. But I found what's most effective is to let the homosexual activists speak to you in their own words, because then you know exactly what's going on. I had an opportunity to go to the conference in New York City. It was a regional conference. Hundreds of people were there, and it was designed to bring the activists together to prepare them to go out into their communities. People from across the country came there. Essentially, the conference started out as you would expect. News media from around the country were there. We had 2020, we had MTV, we had all types of news media were there. And to open the program, Martina Navratilova, the famed tennis player, was there. And she brought up to the stage with her 8 selected children, and some parents as well, to talk about their experiences with what they called anti-homosexual discrimination in the schools. And they went on to detail pretty horrific accounts of violence, verbal harassment, so bad at times that several members of the panel had to drop out of school. Several contemplated perhaps taking their own life. And as the panel went on, I begun to think, well, perhaps this group is serving a good cause. Perhaps I'm here by mistake. The panel discussion talked all about its mission being safe schools. I'll read you just a couple of quotes. One particular individual said that the best approach was a low-key incorporation of homosexual issues into a general discussions of human diversity. Quote, homosexuality shouldn't be such a big deal in schools. It shouldn't be brought up like we're going to talk about being gay today, because that's just showing like we have an agenda or something. Just incorporate it. As the speakers went on to make these comments, I thought that perhaps I had made a trip in error. Perhaps the goal was tolerance. Again, a goal that I think we can all agree with. But something strange happened when the panel discussion ended and the national media left. We broke off into workshops. Some 45 workshops would take place over the next 6 hours. And in the course of these workshops, my wife was along with me, we would discover a far different message. A message not of tolerance, not of safe schools, a message of promotion, a message of celebration, a message of recruitment. These are the messages that were promoted by the GLSEN organization. And again, I'll provide you with some key quotes to let you know exactly what's going on. One presenter who spoke for a local school district that she was a teacher in denounced the quest for tolerance as a condescending campaign for second-class citizenry. The need to have homosexuality openly affirmed and celebrated in America's schools was their mission. I don't want to be tolerated, said one man. I don't want to be put up with. I want to be celebrated. Another lady explained, tolerance is the most minimalist virtue I can think of, and I'm not even sure I want to put it under the category of minimalist. What did they mean by this? What they meant was a complete revision of the curriculum. I'm not sure, again, from not having experience in this particular school district, what happened here. But I can tell you that repeatedly, Massachusetts was hailed as the model state in the country, the state where the GLSEN organization had made the most progress toward reaching its goal, toward infiltrating the schools and having it being promoted, starting in kindergarten, all the way up. And again, the mission was not tolerance, but promotion. I'll go on with a couple more quotes. How were they to do this? They do this by a pretty simple method. What happens is there was a case recently in which an individual suffered such severe discrimination and such harassment and such physical violence he was forced to be in the hospital. Homosexual activists used this horrible and terrible situation to promote, again, the agenda. They brought a lawsuit on behalf of this individual to reclaim damages for his suffering. And what happened was the courts found a $1 million verdict against 3 principals in the school district. This was out in the Midwest. And the homosexual activists used this. They may have used it here. I'm sure they've used it in different schools throughout Boston. They used this, and they said that they used this. The individual who argued the case, a guy named David Buckle from the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, told us this was the program. And he said that what we need to do is provide a way into the schools. And the way we do this is by using a lawsuit like this. We go in, we tell the administrators that they might be held liable if they don't allow us to come in and prevent such harassment from happening. And once they open the door to the Safe School program, then we're in. And what they do with that is they tell the school the only way to eliminate that violence is not to increase enforcement, not to hand out more detentions, not to enforce as we would other bad behavior. What we have to do is promote a diversity training program in the schools, again, starting in kindergarten, to ensure that things happen. Administrators, pressed with this potential of legal liability, let the homosexuals in. And when they let them in, what happens? One panelist described it this way. We might start with people who say, well, go as far as tolerance, then we build from there. Our job, I believe, is to move them down the scale. And they had such things as inclusive elementary school curriculum, re-envisioning high school literature, stir things up, how to start a gay-straight alliance, which is one of the things that you are concerned with here today. And they went on to talk about how it was important to start in the kindergarten because this was the point at which, quote, the students are developing their superego, and that's when the saturation process needs to begin. The saturation process, that doesn't sound to me like the promotion of tolerance. It doesn't sound to me like we're advocating a diversity of viewpoints. It sounds to me like we're going in and programming children, which is exactly what another speaker went on to say. It said, inclusive kindergarten means that when I go into my school, I see that 5-year-olds really are very interested in the big questions. They ask about sex, death, love. And when they ask those questions, we feel a responsibility to tell them the truth. And not only to tell them the truth about what these questions mean from their perspective, but to give them explicit descriptions about what homosexuality is, how one engages in homosexuality, and how one can hook up with the resources to make that choice possible. I would like to conclude with a final quote from Kevin Jennings, the leader of the GLSEN organization, again, originally from Boston. And he said this, 2 years ago, this is a direct quote from him, one of our board members named Ann Simon was called to testify before Congress when they had hearings on the promotion of homosexuality in our schools. And we were busy putting out our press releases and saying, we're not promoting homosexuality, that's not our mission. And then his best friend called him up, a straight woman who lives in London, and she said, well, so what if you are? Kevin went on to say, and I thought of how I can get so wrapped up in my own defensiveness and the like, the day-to-day struggle, that being finished might someday mean that most straight people, when they would hear that someone was promoting homosexuality in the schools, would say, yeah, who cares? Because they wouldn't necessarily equate homosexuality with something bad that you wouldn't want to promote. He goes on to say that most people think of GLSEN and Kids, that's the organization that's helping to bring homosexuality to your school and others. They think GLSEN is bad for kids. They do so because, as he says, there are stereotypes and misinformation, which I think we'll cover with the rest of our speakers. I'd like 5 years from now for most Americans, when they hear the word GLSEN, to think, ooh, that's good for kids. I think these words speak for themselves. It shows you that, if anything, the lesson of my speech is there's more out there than meets the eye. Tolerance is not just a place where we want to breed a safe learning environment, which I think we can all agree is a noble goal. It goes beyond that. Again, our speakers are going to tell you more about what exactly the homosexual lifestyle entails and perhaps why it might not be the best thing to use our tax dollars and to use our time to promote with our children. There's some books available outside that you should really take a look at. One in particular called Homosexuality and the Politics of Truth by Dr. Jeffrey Satinover. Now, he is not your run-of-the-mill individual. He was trained at MIT, Harvard, and has held numerous positions and has written a really tremendous book that provides an objective look at what goes on in the movement and, more importantly, the truth behind the science, and takes it into a perspective that the average person can understand. We all hear that the gay lifestyle is genetic and there's no way out of it, and that once gay, always gay. But I think what speaks most eloquently to that is an actual individual who's left the lifestyle. And they do exist. People up here in Massachusetts would have you think they don't. We're fortunate to have with us tonight one such individual who has made a tremendous recovery. His name is Anthony Falzerano, and he's the National Director of the Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays of Washington, D.C. And, of course, he's a former homosexual who lived the gay lifestyle for 9 long years. But he's recovered since then, and he's happily married for 14 years and has 2 children. So whatever you think about the science of it, it really doesn't matter in the end, because we have up next a living individual who will tell you that homosexuality can be and is a choice.
Thank you. How many of the older people in this auditorium remember someone coming from the American Cancer Society in the 50s and 60s and showing you a cross-section of a cancerous lung and try to keep you from smoking cigarettes. Does anyone remember that? I remember that very well because with what that gentleman presented that afternoon in our high school, I never smoked in my life. He just held up a section of a cancerous lung. It was all black, and it looked pretty bad. And he said, this is what happens when you smoke for 30 years. And the kids were all like, ugh. It worked because I never smoked. I come to you today in that same spirit. I am a former homosexual. I lived in the gay lifestyle for 9 years of my life, from the time I was 17 until I was 26 years old. And for the early years of that time, I was very happy being a homosexual. It was probably the best thing I had ever done in my life was to come out of the closet because of the background that I had come from. My parents were married for 50 years. My father died about 10 years ago. And my parents, on the surface, were quite a normal family. But my father was an Italian immigrant to this country, had to work very hard to support his 7 children, and really was not there for me as a father. So he's a very psychologically absent dad. My mother, a wonderful woman, tried to make up for my father's physical and psychological absence, and she really smothered me. She's Italian and she's Jewish. And I've got a great joke. What's the difference between how an Italian mother gets you to eat and how a Jewish mom gets you to eat? The Italian mother says, eat or I'll kill you, and the Jewish mother says, eat or I'll kill myself. So that's how I was raised. She was a wonderful woman, and she's still alive. She's 82 years old. But she was quite overbearing in my life, and she never really allowed me to grow up. I was living in Boston as a homosexual, and my parents lived in New Jersey, and the umbilical cord extended from New Jersey up to Boston. She just really would not sever the tie. I was sexually molested beginning at the age of 9 years old. 80% of homosexuals have been molested and or raped as children, and that is not reported to you, unfortunately. But I have kept this data for the last 10 years. I am National Director of PFOX, Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays. We have 23 chapters around the country, and we are a Catholic Protestant outreach to people who have homosexual loved ones. We teach them how to love their gay children, but to strongly disagree with their lifestyle choice. No one chooses to be homosexual. It is inflicted upon you early in life, but one can choose whether they're going to be gay or not and enter the gay subculture. There is not one bit of information out there that proves homosexuals are born that way, and all the 3 studies that have appeared in the newspapers in the last 5 years have been planted by a 1,200-member gay journalist organization in this country. And their desire is to change America's mind that homosexuals are born this way, and if they can anesthetize you into that belief, then they can push the gay agenda on America. And I can tell you they are being quite successful, quite successful. They have a $32 million war chest. They are lobbying in Washington, D.C. My office is in Washington. Groups like the Human Rights Campaign Fund, the Lambda Defense Fund was mentioned here. These organizations are lobbying Congress. They have already pulled out 30 sodomy laws in America. I think there's about 19 states that still have sodomy laws. Our country is in big trouble. We just look towards the White House and we see what President Clinton is allegedly involved in these days and is getting away with. And if the person who is in the highest position in this land is getting away with alleged adulterous affairs and promiscuity, what does that say about the moral fiber of America? Something has got to change. Isn't our country in trouble enough? The minds of our children are at stake. Homosexuals are not born that way. They are made. And I was recruited into the gay lifestyle when I was in my first year in college, actually towards the end of high school. The gay groups weren't able to get into the high schools in the 70s, so I was hit while I was in my first year in college. Your children are at risk. The average male homosexual dies at the age of 42 years old. 62% of people who get AIDS in this country are homosexual. The gay lobbyists are trying to convince America AIDS is not a gay disease. It absolutely is in this country. And what they do is they warp the statistics and they take the international figures. In Africa, it is mainly a heterosexual disease, but it is really a disease of promiscuity, heterosexual and homosexual. Lesbians have very high incidence of breast cancer. We are seeing over 50% of the cases of gonorrhea and syphilis and other venereal disease are coming from the homosexual population. That's 3% of America is homosexual. 50% of the venereal diseases are coming from that population. Do we want to affirm our children into this lifestyle? In the age of AIDS, do we want to affirm teenage children into a lifestyle? If they have sex once, they can get this disease. I lost 35 of my friends to AIDS by the time I was 32 years old. Some of them were the finest people I've ever known. Some of them were some of the most compassionate people I've ever known. But America is being duped, and the homosexual community is being duped. And parents are being duped, and children are being duped. And you know what? The big attack of the gay agenda is not necessarily to convince you that homosexuality is okay. They want to anesthetize you. Because if you have a lukewarm thought on the homosexual agenda in America, then you're powerless. They have sterilized you. They cannot get to most of the people beyond 40 years of age. They know, most people in America know that homosexuality is not a healthy lifestyle. So they are trying to get down into the high schools, the junior high schools, and the elementary schools to change the mind of the children, because the children are going to be the future voters in America. And they will not be able to turn these sodomy laws out, and they will not be able to promote a gay agenda until they get the votes. And of course, their supreme job is to get to the Supreme Court. They want to change the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to accept homosexuality in as a civil right. Well, black people are born black, and women are born women. Homosexuals are not born that way. And the gay agenda with their $32 million war chest in Washington is hitting Massachusetts. You have a very liberal senator, Kennedy, here. You have 2 homosexual congressmen, and they are lobbying. They are 3 of the biggest threats to the traditional family in America today. I want you to know that there are 4 ex-gay networks. How many of you in this room, please raise your hand, have ever even heard of ex-gay ministry? Just heard of it. Looks to be about 20% of you. Do you realize that there are 4 ex-gay networks in this country? Homosexuals Anonymous, Exodus, Transforming Congregations, and Courage. We are currently ministering to 20,000 former homosexuals. Was any of that reported to you when these people came out? Do you really want money to come into your school from the state and have them lobby you to promote homosexuality to your children? Is it really important to have that money and sell the soul of this town and to sell the soul of your children? I can tell you that I had a friend who had 4 sexual partners. He was a former boyfriend of mine, and he died of AIDS. We buried him 2.5 years ago. You don't have to be a promiscuous homosexual to get AIDS. And we have people coming in here. I understand you have a gay student group in high school. I can tell you that these groups eventually will promote homosexuality into these gay teens who are sexually confused. And they will promote going to gay bars. And eventually they will promote them having sex. I don't understand. I would not tolerate that in my family. I am now married for 14 years. I have 2 children. I don't want my children learning about homosexuality when they're 8 years old. Children are innocent. They are innocent of carnal knowledge, and there is a time psychologically to expose them to carnal knowledge. There are books like Heather Has Two Mommies, Daddy Has a Roommate, Daddy's Getting Married and Not to a Woman, and these books are being pushed into the public libraries, and they are being pushed into the elementary school libraries. They're beautiful books. They're very colorful. They've won Caldecott Awards. But they are trying to change the mind of your children, and they are trying to influence your children. This has got to stop. Can someone flick on that overhead projector? It's on the front of the machine in the lower right. It took me 2 years to recover my heterosexuality after being in it for 9 years. And I had no idea that you can recover your heterosexuality. I believe what the gay community was telling me. I believe what the newspapers were telling me. I believe what Hollywood was telling me. Until I came across Exodus International, and Exodus changed my life. I assure you, if I did not come out of homosexuality in 1983, I would have died of AIDS, because I began to live a promiscuous lifestyle. Most homosexuals don't start out that way, but they do end up that way, and it's mainly the male homosexual population. Lesbians, they are not typically promiscuous, but they tend to be in very emotionally dependent relationships, mainly because they have not bonded with their mother properly, and they have an anger towards men. They will go over to a woman to be a rescuer. Male homosexuals are involved in promiscuous behavior. Most male homosexuals have had over 60 sexual partners. Some have had 500 sexual partners. I am currently helping a homosexual in Washington who's 33 years old who has had 5,200 sexual partners. This is not a healthy lifestyle that we should be promoting to our children and that our teachers in the secular high schools should be promoting. Basically, this graph is stating that this is how one comes into healthy heterosexuality. Between the time of 0 and 2.5 years old, the boy or girl, the baby, will bond with the mother. At the time of 2.5 years of age to 3 years of age, the boy will notice that he is different from his mother and will go over to the father for bonding. If the father is physically absent in the household, possibly from divorce, psychologically absent, maybe he's a workaholic, maybe the mother and father are having a bad relationship, the boy, not having that male role model, will gravitate back over to the mother. And that's basically what happened to me. My father was unavailable to me in those very key years of my psychosexual development, and I gravitated back to my mother. What happens if the boy does not bond with his father when he enters the third level, 6 to 13, the prepubescent years? The boy will not know how to play softball. He might be a bit awkward. He might be a bit shy. If he's hanging out with his mother, if he's hanging out with his mother's girlfriends, if he's playing Barbie dolls, if he's doing all of this effeminate behavior, when he goes off into elementary school, the boys, the other boys who are quite normalized in their psychosexual growth, they will begin to make fun of him. And it's very sad. We don't want to see any pre-homosexual children made fun of. We don't want to hear them called horrible, atrocious names that we all know and that I will not repeat. As a child, I was pushed into the lockers in junior high school and high school. They knew I was different. They knew I was awkward. We need to have the youth in this school, junior, high school, helping kids who are at risk, that are pre-homosexual. We don't need to have children making fun of them or hurting them. We would obviously, anyone here would be against violence to any pre-homosexual child. So what happens is there's the third blow to a pre-homosexual male, and he goes through puberty at 13. Mary starts looking at Bill. Well, Johnny, who is pre-homosexual, will start to look at Bill also. Because he has a stunting of his psychosexual growth, because he has not had the imprimatur of male homosexuality, he will begin to sexualize his deficits of maleness and begin to look at other boys. This is a key time for intervention to help a boy or a pre-lesbian get back on the right track. If you allow this homosexual agenda into your school and they start getting to children in this range, they are going to continue to affirm them into brokenness. And that's why it's very dangerous to have children who are pre-homosexual affirmed into a lifestyle that is killing them. So they go through puberty, 13 to 18 years old. They're silently dealing with this. Most homosexuals don't want to be homosexual. Most homosexuals, if they can push that button, they would push that button and say, I want out of the gay lifestyle. Me, I was very popular with the girls, but I had no sexual attraction towards them. And I had to fake it during high school. A lot of homosexuals will do that. They will hide their homosexuality. So between the time of 13 and 18 years of age is when the homosexual might be found out. He might be outed. He might be made fun of, hurt. And of course we would be against any violence to any child, no matter what that child is dealing with. And what happens between 13 and 18, they will come out of the closet. It didn't happen until after 18, 10, 20, 30 years ago, but it's happening earlier and earlier and earlier. And then they go into adulthood, they enter into college, and then the gay groups on campus hit them. There are campus gay, lesbian, activist alliance groups, and the very powerful gay lobbyists in Washington are funding organizations like this. Homosexuals are not born that way. They are recruited, and they are now hitting the colleges very easily, and now they are recruiting, and they have your high school and your junior high school on their list. And you must stop this, and if you don't stop it now, evil will thrive when good men and good women do nothing. I wish someone came to me, a high school counselor, and told me about Exodus or Homosexuals Anonymous or Courage or Transforming Congregations. I would have kept myself from going into 9 years of a lifestyle that almost killed me. Exodus saved my life, and that's why I come here and share with you tonight, coming up from Washington, because I don't want to see one more child go into this very, very unhealthy lifestyle. And after 2 years of psychological counseling, dealing with my sexual abuse, dealing with forgiveness of my father for not being there for me, cutting the apron strings of my over-dominating mother, and healing from secondary addictions to pornography, I was freed from the homosexual lifestyle. I am now married for 14 and a half years, and God has given me 2 wonderful children. Thank you very much.
The things that you've heard are confusing and frightening to think about. Any attempt to dismantle the homosexual programs in the schools and their efforts to reach children means confronting the organized homosexual movement. As Brian Burt pointed out, this movement covers its actions in secrecy. They twist the truth, they withhold facts, and if you think that this won't go even further, you're fooling yourselves. Just a few weeks ago, the British Parliament voted to lower the homosexual age of consent to 16 in response to a huge push by homosexual activists. But they even want it lower. Once 16 is carried, we'll be renewing our campaign for an age to 14 for everyone, gay and straight, says one of their leaders. In the Netherlands, where adults can legally have sex with children as young as 14, homosexual groups are now preparing legislation to lower it to 12. The question is, what are you willing to do? Most importantly, are you willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with others from across the state and refuse to be intimidated by the name-calling and not be ashamed to stand up for what you believe is right, even if the Boston Globe has decided that you're just being backward and ignorant? The voicemail number for the Parents' Rights Coalition is 781-433-7106. Our address is Post Office Box 175, Newton, Massachusetts 02466.